President Buhari says those who describe him as Baba Go Slow will be shocked during his second term. Economic and Financial Crimes Commission describes as unfortunate the acquittal of former President Goodluck Jonathan's cousin, Robert Azibola. In international news, police say man kills 2 in Japan stabbing that injures 16 schoolgirls. And in sport, federal government fulfills promise to Clement Westerhoff after 25 years.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. In just under 24 hours, President Buhari will be sworn in to rule Nigeria for another 4 years. Some Nigerians have described his pace of governance during his first tenure as too slow for a country like Nigeria. But President Buhari says it will shock those who describe him as Baba Go Slow when he begins his second term. Buhari said this during a television interview where he promised to ensure a police and judicial reform in his second term. The president says when it comes to police reform, the Inspector General of Police cannot do it alone, but rather with committed commissioners of police and DPOs. The president and his deputy vice president, Yemi Osinbajo, have received assets declaration forms from the Code of Conduct Bureau on Monday, 24 hours to the deadline for submission to declare their assets. Code of Conduct Bureau Chairman Professor Mohammed Isha presented the forms to Buhari and Osinbajo at a short ceremony at the Presidential Villa, Abuja. President Buhari, Vice President Osinbajo, and all political office holders are required by law to declare their assets prior to assuming office. Buhari asked the Bureau to keep his forms safely for future reference because of shenanigans that may be pulled by political opponents. People's Democratic Party vice presidential candidate and former Anambra State Governor Peter Obi has openly criticized the Minister of Transportation Rotimi Amaechi's statement on the Southeast and the 2023 presidential contest. Obi wondered why Amaechi, who is not from the Southeast, was writing off the region from the next presidential election. Obi says Amaechi is not a son of the soil, so it was out of place for him to make such a statement. Obi spoke in an interview with journalists in Port Harcourt after the lecture and book presentation in honor of Rivers State Governor Nyesom Wike. Obi also says the only way President Buhari will tackle insecurity is by uniting the people and tackling the scourge headlong. The Independent National Electoral Commission has confirmed that 64 certificates of return have been withdrawn from persons thought to have won in the 2019 general elections and reissued to those declared actual winners by courts of law. INEC Chairman Mahmoud Yakubu announced this at the presentation of certificates of return to Zamfara State Governor-elect and elected members of the National and State Houses of Assembly from the state. Yakubu reiterates the importance of conducting proper primaries by political parties before elections take place in order to reduce the spate of litigation afterwards. Yakubu says there are more than 800 cases pending in various courts across the country challenging the conduct of primaries by political parties for the 2019 general elections. Yakubu says the Zamfara example is not the first pre-election case determined by the Supreme Court arising from the recent party primaries. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, has described as unfortunate the acquittal of former President Goodluck Jonathan's cousin, Robert Azibola. An Abuja Federal High Court has discharged and acquitted Azibola of the $40 million money laundering charges filed against him by the EFCC on the grounds that the prosecution failed to prove its claim of money laundering against the defendant. EFCC has slammed Azibola and his company One Plus Holdings Nigeria Limited with a 2-count charge of $40 million money laundering. The commission had alleged Azibola received the money from the detained and retired former National Security Advisor Sambo Dasuki without any contract agreement. The court had struck out in March 7 of an initial 9-count charge the EFCC preferred against Azibola, his wife Stella, and their firm. Coming up, African stories. 45 dead, 200 missing in DR Congo boat mishap. And later, international news. Police confirms man kills 2 in Japan stabbing that injured 16 schoolgirls.
You are watching ANN.
Shining our eyes on breaking news, whether in the east or in the west, with Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Boko Haram in Nigeria, with turbulence in the north and agitation in the south. Wherever you live in Nigeria, wherever news happens in Africa, we've got it covered. ANN News, connecting Africans in a truly African spirit.
Somewhere in the world, every second of the day, news is happening. And of course, Nigeria is bustling with news day and night. That is why ANN doesn't sleep. Our eyes are peeled, wide open, so no story escapes our radar. We stay abreast of world events and happenings at home. We keep you up to the minute in the world of sports. We give you information to stay on top of your investments and all the hard facts you'll need to navigate your day. If you miss us on air, you can keep up to date on our website, annafrica.net, and on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. We are ANN, Africa News Network. We do news right in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to African stories. Malawi's Election Commission has announced President Peter Mutharika winner of the recently held presidential election. The results show the incumbent President Mutharika had won the May 21st poll by a slim margin of 38.5% after the country's High Court lifted an injunction on the announcements of the results over suspected voting malpractices. Head of the Malawi Electoral Commission, Jane Hansher, has appealed for calm regarding the result. The death toll in a boat accident on Lake Mal Ndobo in Western Democratic Republic of the Congo has risen to 45. Authorities say at least 200 passengers are still missing. Provincial Governor Antoine Musamba says the vessel was carrying more than 400 passengers when it sank. A local mayor says majority of those on board were teachers going to collect their salaries in an adjacent city. He said 11 children were among those who died when the old and overcrowded boat went down in strong waves. The captain of the boat has reportedly been arrested and investigation is ongoing. Officials say the search and rescue operations on the lake could take up to 3 weeks. Egypt is a big market for mobile phones, especially brands that are either Huawei or that use related components. Now that the US has banned the transfer or sale of its technology to Chinese companies, Egyptian mobile phone companies are worried Google's Huawei restrictions could affect their market. Yazar Hakim reports from Cairo.
Smartphones and tablet sales have seen a 20% increase year-on-year in Egypt. 18 million smartphones have been sold in 2018, covering 45% of all electronic sales.
The Egyptian mobile market is the largest in the Middle East and North Africa. The brands with the highest demand are far ahead than other competitors. South Korea's Samsung is the number 1, closely followed by Huawei.
But the decision by Google against Huawei has taken everyone here by surprise. Many of the mobile users here in Egypt do not yet understand the implication of the Google action, and there's a lot of confusion in the market at the moment. Mohammed is a salesman at an electronics shop. He says Huawei is a main selling item. Now he's waiting to see how clients will react to the developments.
It's a bit early to get any feedback from the market, but clients have come to ask me about the issue, and I explained to them the details and how it doesn't affect the operating mobiles. Huawei is a huge company, and I expect it will overcome the problems.
The clients themselves are still undecided, though most of whom we talk to and own a Huawei device would want to stay loyal to the brand.
The Google apps are important because we are used to it, just like WhatsApp and Facebook. It would affect our decision to buy a mobile, but I'm going to wait. Maybe the problem will be solved soon.
It's essential to have the Google apps and Google Play. We depend on them all the time. I heard Huawei may come up with its own operating system. Maybe it would be a good alternative.
Meanwhile, shop owners like Mohammed fear the Huawei-Google clash can actually lead to a slowdown in sales. An example of how a trade war thousands of miles away can impact small businesses here in Cairo.
Protesters in the Sudan have begun a two-day national strike on Tuesday. Public services were reportedly grounded across the country, causing flight cancellations. Travelers at Khartoum Airport and the Sudanese capital's main bus terminal have been stranded as airport workers joined the strike. Hours to the start of the action, several government-run institutions reportedly expressed their support for the general strike. This is the latest move by protest leaders to pile pressure on the Sudan military to push for a civilian-led transition and the transfer of power to a democratic administration. Demonstrations have continued in the capital, Khartoum, since the ouster of President Omar al-Bashir last month. When we return, international news. Police say man kills 2 in Japan, stabbing that injured 16 schoolgirls. And later, sport. Federal government fulfills promise to Clement Westerhoff after 25 years.
You are watching ANN.
Dear Mommy, you went out that night with the baby in your tummy, but you did not come back. The baby is very fine and she eats and sleeps a lot. Everyone says that you are in a better place, but I miss you so much. I keep asking them, where is the better place? But nobody answers me. Auntie Kemi just hugs me and says go and play. Mommy, I miss you. Please, when are you coming home?
I still do miss you, Mom. And in honor of your memory, I'm a doctor today working with the MTN Foundation to save mothers and children every day.
Ending mother and child mortality in Nigeria is dear to us. We will keep strengthening this most important bond just for you.
There is a new all-news network on the scene in Nigeria to give news from a purely news perspective and to promote free information flow across Africa. Fresh views, unbiased, bold, with a purely African view. African News Network, ANN, in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to world event. Japanese authorities have said a schoolgirl and an adult man were killed and 16 other young girls injured in a stabbing incident at a bus stop outside Tokyo on Tuesday. They also said another man detained at the scene later died. National broadcaster NHK reports the girls between 6 and 12 years old were students at a private Catholic school in Kawasaki City, south of Tokyo, and were boarding their school bus when the suspect attacked them. Police said an 11-year-old girl and a 39-year-old man were killed. NHK said the man was likely the father of one of the children. Another woman was severely injured along with the 16 other schoolgirls who were hurt. Police said the suspect was detained at the scene after stabbing himself in the neck, but he died later. Motive for the attack was not yet clear, but there were no immediate fears of a wider security threat. There have been previous incidents of mass stabbings in Japan, sometimes involving the vulnerable. Although U.S. President Donald Trump was savoring the red carpet treatment he received in Japan during his 4-day state visit that wrapped up yesterday, issues of trade with Japan and China still linger. Trade issues with Japan have not been resolved, and U.S. trade frictions with China have an even more widespread negative effect on small and medium companies across the country. Hendrik Subrande is at one of those affected firms in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
This building in Colorado Springs is all about bringing folks joy. Elope sells headwear, costumes, and accessories for Halloween and other occasions.
We make whimsical wearables.
Keith Johnson is the owner of Elope, one of many companies caught up in the USChina trade dispute.
It's not fun to be in the middle of a trade war and your products being right there in the middle of it. This is a good one for China because this is China's national animal.
We first met a bearded Keith last fall, shortly after a 10% U.S. tariff on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports went into effect. Most of Elope's 1,000-plus products are manufactured in China. Since then, that 10% tariff on things like headwear, these ram horns are made in, yes, China, has gone up to 25%. That's 40% of his business. He can't absorb all the increased cost, meaning
we're going to have to raise prices. There's no doubt. And that's going to fall on the consumer. There's very little I can do about it at this point. I can just keep making great products and bringing them out to the public and hoping that they love our products, even if they're more expensive.
And now comes the specter of a new 25% tariff on all of Elope's remaining products. The Trump administration says it's considering it. Keith figures half of these items will have to be marked up.
It's huge. It's not going to shut us down, but it's going to hurt badly.
It can be challenging and it's scary for people, and it's hard when you have these outside forces against us that really can impact that morale.
Elope's Carol Lee Asphalt says small and medium firms are bearing the brunt of the trade dispute.
It's the companies like us that are feeling this pain the most.
Along with, Elope says, workers in its Chinese factories who worry about smaller orders and whose profit margins are thin as it is.
They are very stressed out. They are afraid that to them is a survival issue.
President Trump says the costs of the dispute are largely shouldered by China through its tariff payments. Keith disagrees.
Yeah, that's the biggest joke of them all, because none of it's borne by China.
With no resolution in sight, he thinks tariffs will bedevil Elope for years, which means they'll simply have to grin and bear it here. At least they've got the grinning part down.
Malaysia's Environment Minister said on Tuesday his country will send back as much as 3,000 tons of plastic waste to the countries from where they came. This makes Malaysia the latest Asian country to reject rubbish from rich countries. Last year, Malaysia became the world's main destination for plastic waste after China banned its import, disrupting a yearly flow of more than 7 million tons of the trash. Dozens of recycling factories have cropped up in Malaysia, many without operating licenses, and communities have complained of environmental problems. Minister of Energy, Technology, Science, Environment and Climate Change, UB News, says 60 containers of trash that had been imported illegally would be sent back. Last week, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte ordered his government to hire a private shipping company to send back to Canada 69 containers of garbage and leave them within its territorial waters if it refuses to accept them. Canada says the waste exported to the Philippines between 2013 and 2014 was a commercial transaction done without government consent. It has agreed to take back the garbage, but Duterte lost patience and ordered it out of arrangements were being made. Malaysian officials have identified at least 14 originating countries for its unwanted waste. They include the United States, Japan, France, Canada, Australia, and Britain. Up next, sports. Federal government fulfills promise to Clement Westerhoff after 25 years. Please stay with us.
You are watching ANN.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. In sport, the federal government has fulfilled its 25-year-old promise to Nigeria's former national team football coach, Clement Westerhoff. Westerhoff had helped Nigeria's Super Eagles to qualify for their first World Cup in the United States in 1994. Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola, said many promises were made to Westerhoff in 1994 when the country lifted the African National Cup and also qualified for the World Cup in the U.S. The federal government has presented him with a house. A Sierra Leonean High Court has acquitted and battered former association president Isha Johansson of all charges of corruption. Her Secretary General was also acquitted of same. FIFA suspended the SLFA last year because of government interference in soccer affairs, specifically protesting the removal of Johansson and General Secretary Christopher Kamara. FIFA's ban on the West African country led to the inability of the SLFA to compete in the qualification towards the African Cup of Nations AFCON 2019 slated for Egypt. I'm sure they are relieved now. That is any news this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on these and other stories, visit the social media platforms and join the conversation on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatuji. Have a pleasant evening.